Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers, of course, the Arizona Cardinals. My co-host is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, which has been rebooted and is available for your listening pleasure and all the podcast distributions. And if you sign up for their Patreon bonus, you can become a patron and add a bonus episode each week. And at the higher level as well, at $4 a month, you can also get draft content that they write as well. Fantastic deal. If you love draft stuff, Seth and Justin Higdon are great at that. And well, what was the most recent show that you guys did? I know you guys recorded Monday night. I listened to it this afternoon. You had some talk about some of the pro day numbers coming out and things like that, and the quarterback numbers, the thoughts on the 49ers and their trade. It was a fun episode.
Yeah, and kind of what we'll talk about a little bit tonight is, because the San Francisco 49ers decided to shake up the draft a month early, which, as content creators, we very much appreciate things like that, because it just gives you just a lot of fodder to write about and talk about and discuss. And so we discussed that. One of the big questions is who are the 49ers traded up for? And so we had a little fun with that discussion between the three guys that we assume will be the option, with the idea that Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson are going to go 1 and 2. And then we discussed a little bit about what the heck are the Dolphins doing? I mean, you go from 3 to 12 and then 12 to 6. I get that you added a first round pick, but then you just gave one up too. So, I get that you added 2 first round picks technically, but then you gave up 1, 2 next year. So, it's just an interesting conversation to have, because the whole idea is, you go from 12 to 3 because you're confident one of the 3 guys you love will be there. We talked about this with the Cardinals last year. If they traded up or they made a move, and what you would have to do and where you would need to go. The more interesting one was the Dolphins, because you don't have any control over the first 5 picks. And so even if you are really confident that the first 3 picks are going to be quarterbacks, you don't have any control over it. And then you have no idea what the Atlanta Falcons are going to do. And quite frankly, I don't think anybody has any idea what the Falcons are going to do. And then
you might argue that they don't know what they're doing either.
Right. And so, those are the things that we discussed on this or the last episode. Behind the paywall, we discussed, we gave our quarterback rankings. We talked about, the interesting way that quarterback rankings are being manipulated. So yeah, just check us out on the Patreon. You can become a patron. You can go to Patreon and search Original Draft Breakdown Podcast. You can go to Twitter, and Justin and I both have it linked in our bio. So at SCoxFB or at AFC, the number 2 NFC. You can find all that stuff there. So.
And this will take us, we're in episode 302. When it comes to the Arizona Cardinals, we have more talk about free agency, but believe it, we actually Then we recorded the night before the news broke of their new cornerback, and since then they've made additions at cornerback, at safety, a backup quarterback, and there could be another cornerback coming to town too. So let's go ahead and start off this addition to the show with talking about the cornerback position. Give me just a second, Seth. I need to shut those dogs up.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
So let's talk about the addition of Malcolm Butler. It was the big news of the week. It was the move we've been waiting for. It was a cornerback. The Cardinals hadn't addressed it. It was arguably their biggest need. I mean, when you were sitting there as your top two corners are Byron Murphy and Robert Alford, you're like, okay, but who's going to play in the slot? Like, what are they going to do when they go nickel? That, because we knew Byron Murphy's going to play inside. But we finally got the news. Malcolm Butler, who had one of the most famous plays in Super Bowl history there at State Farm Stadium against the Patriots when he was with the Patriots against the Seattle Seahawks, when he had that interception at the goal line, went clinching that Super Bowl win for the Patriots. He played with the Tennessee Titans, was released as a cap casualty, joins the Cardinals on a very friendly deal. Now, he addressed the media on Tuesday. I haven't had a chance to listen to his comments, but he comes on a pretty good deal. It's worth what? John Gamadoro from Arizona Sports 98.7 said that the base is going to be under $3.5 million. It looks like it's a one-year deal of up to $6 million, which for a cornerback of his talent, I mean, granted, he is older. He is older at this point. He's not young anymore. He gives the Cardinals a true number one corner. You could probably argue he is now better than what Patrick Peterson was last year. The numbers are eye-popping. He had 4 interceptions last year and a whopping 100 tackles, which from a cornerback is absolutely absurd. What did you make of the move? Because it was a surprise to me. I thought they were gonna go bargain deal, just kind of go with guys. Maybe they would have brought back Drake Kirkpatrick, Jonathan Joseph, but the Butler addition was a strong move. Obviously, it gives them a number one corner, someone that they can trust to be good. Whether he doesn't have to be great, but he should be able to be good.
Yeah, and it gives them the ability to be physical out on the edge, which is not the strength of Patrick Peterson, obviously, but let's be fair, it wasn't Drake Kirkpatrick's strength either. So you now all of a sudden have a corner in Malcolm Butler who, as you said, and trust me, we're not trying to like butter this up or make this sound better than it is, but to finally have a cornerback who's willing to be physical and participate in the run game is incredibly important, especially when you think about the NFC West. I mean, you've got a team in the Seattle Seahawks who fired the guy who led them to the most points in franchise history because he didn't run the ball enough. Obviously, we know what Kyle Shanahan does in the run game. Probably the best offensive coordinator in terms of developing run game schemes. Maybe only the Ravens can really challenge that. And then of course the Rams and Sean McVay with Cam Akers. We know how much they like to run the football. So when you look at it, getting a guy like Malcolm Butler, who's not only a willing tackler but a very good tackler, huge upgrade for them. In coverage, he's at a point where he's, like you said, equal to, if not better than Patrick Peterson. And when we say that, we're not trying to take a shot at Patrick. I think people are like, some people think, oh, well, you're just saying that because he's gone. No, really, that's not what it is. This show is talked about for the past 2 years after the suspension that it looked like he had lost that step, that edge that he had had. And, whether it was because of, taking supplements or whatever it was, he just didn't look like the same player physically outside of a single game against the Cleveland Browns. He had some nice games here and there this season, but for the most part, he was just a guy that you couldn't trust.
He was just so
Um,
inconsistent. His good was still good. You would see him locking deep guys down, and still, honestly, outside the numbers, he's still pretty great. But teams know that, and a lot of today's NFL is about moving guys around, making guys run sideways, trying to get Pat to run through traffic. And I will say, for all the good moments, it was just that his lows were bad last year. I mean, he looked bad sometimes in coverage, like you haven't seen Peterson beat. So maybe Butler's ceiling isn't Patrick's best, but hopefully what it brings is a little bit more consistency where you can take away the bad beats that Pat had last year at times.
yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing to your point is that when you look at his days in coverage, his best days in coverage were against San Francisco, who doesn't really have a dynamic outside wide receiver, as Jess just put it, and then the week 7 win over Seattle. That was by far, I think you and I would agree, his best game when he played against DK Metcalf. But after that, I mean, he really struggled against Washington and Terry McLaurin. Then the second Seattle game, he was awful. Against Philadelphia, he struggled. Um, Carolina and Robbie Anderson really, really tore him up. So you look at just kind of the different games, and it was more about the consistency. Maybe you're not going to get the all-star performance that Peterson can have one game or two games a year, um, but you're not going to have those random games against the New York Giants where Malcolm Butler gets beat, or not the Giants, the Carolina Panthers, excuse me, where Butler gets beat. I think it was 5 for 150 and a touchdown, but and you and I love Robbie Anderson. I mean, we've talked
Yes.
about him on this podcast and what type of fit he would be for this team and organization and offense, but he's not that good.
Right. Right. Now, with the addition of Butler, what it does to the depth chart, it makes you feel much better going into the draft, where you have Butler as your number one. You have Byron Murphy as your number two, and now we know he's going to play inside, but I'm still going to consider him, and he should be on the field 100% of the time. It shouldn't be in his third year where he only plays on nickel downs when there's some games like against the 49ers when he's going to end up playing very little because they run with so many either two backs or two tight ends schemes where they don't have three receivers on the field. So my intention and my hope is that Byron is their number two, who happens to slide inside, kind of how Gerard Powers did for many years with the Cardinals. And then their number three right now is Robert Alford, but that could also become a rookie. It could be another guy, a guy they would bring back, whether it's a really old Jonathan Joseph, whether it be some Drake Kirkpatrick. But when you have three guys in Butler, Murphy, and Alford, you now feel at least okay with what's happening with the rest of the season. I mean, the offseason, I mean.
Yeah, and you talked about it a little bit earlier. Quentin Dunbar would be kind of that perfect fit. You look at even like his best season, 2019, with the Washington football team, and the reality is he didn't play a ton. I think he was still under 700 snaps, which in most NFL seasons is about 70%. And so that's not to say anything negative. That's to say what if that's what if that's his role? And to Jess's point, one, from a cost perspective, that's about a $2.5 million type of deal, right? Like you're not going to pay him $5 million a year to play 70% of the snaps at his peak. And then two, you've got Byron Murphy, who's hopefully taking that next step in his progression as a player and can become a multiple guy, not just a slot guy that you're taking off the floor or off the field 50% of the time. And that's, I think, the biggest concern right now is you don't want to have to, whoever the guy is, whether it's Dunbar, whether it's Jonathan Joseph, whether it's, a Dre Kirkpatrick coming back, or whether it's, a JC Horn or a Patrick Surtain in the first round of the draft. You don't want to have to rely on them because Byron Murphy hasn't developed.
Right.
That's one of the things that we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, is that the development of guys that are in-house, it has to be there. And I'm not going to blame anybody at that point. It's on the player. Like, you got to take that next step and become a guy that can work both inside and out. So yeah, you're the main slot guy, so you're going to play, like we said, 65% of the snaps. But if you're the main slot guy who can, as Jess said, slide out and play, one-on-one against Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk, knowing that the 49ers are running two tight ends with two backs with Kyle Juszczyk in there, then you've got to have, a guy that can flex out and but stay on the field, because that's the other thing is Murph is good against the run as well.
Yes.
So if Butler and Murphy are your outside guys on rundowns against teams like San Francisco, I think that just makes your team better. Because I don't think, even drafting a guy like Surtain or JC Horn, who are very willing tacklers, that's still a lot to ask a rookie in the NFL to come in and make plays against, Chris Carson and Cam Akers and Raheem Mostert in San Francisco.
Yeah, and for those of you, if you didn't catch it, that Quentin Dunbar played for the Seattle Seahawks in 2020 after they traded for him from the Washington football team. He has not been signed by the Cardinals, but he's scheduled to visit them after meeting with the Detroit Lions coming up. Dunbar that name was actually, hey, that's a good, because he has a nice ceiling. Now, the one thing about Dunbar, he's yet to, in his 6 seasons in the NFL, has never gotten all the way to 16 games in a year. He does have a nice ceiling when it comes to coverage. He does do a nice job. He can play man quite well. But he's not as consistent as you might like. But if you add him to the mix, what makes that corner room you're very comfortable with it, because then you've got Butler and you've got Murphy, and then you've got a combination of Alford and Dunbar, neither of whom, like, Dunbar just consistently can't play a full season, while Alford just hasn't played it down the last 2 years. But the two of them are mostly healthy, or it can be healthy if they don't have to overlap injuries together. That gives you a comfort level with veteran play on the outside, to where if a rookie if they take a draft pick, a corner in the first or the second round or even third round, you can allow that guy to work into and beat them out, instead of being forced into playing the way Byron Murphy was his first year. And that was, Cardinals fans, it wasn't pretty. When you had Byron Murphy and Tremaine Brock as your top two corners, it was not a pretty sight to behold at that time.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like we say, not only continued improvement, but the growth of Murph is going to be kind of key to this entire operation, taking the next step. because at some point you have to have that growth from your own players, and we're going to continually expect it from Kyler Murray. Why are we not demanding that same type of growth from Byron Murphy?
Coming out on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on. The Cardinals have agreed to terms with 3 more safeties, 2 that return, 1 that comes from Cincinnati. A little bit of a surprise for me. Let's talk about those additions next on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Hey, with free agency having started and the NFL draft just around the corner, the Arizona Cardinals are one of many teams trying to take their game to the next level. And my guess is that we guys are also looking to take the team in our pants to the next level as well. That's why our partners at Manscaped, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming, have partnered with us to make sure that your situation down there leaves you a contender. For all you Cardinals fans, we have an exclusive 20% off promo code CRED at manscaped.com. So you start off, you've got the Lawnmower 3.0, which is like the top defensive prospects, has a high motor, production, plays to the whistle, but won't hurt your team with going a little too far. It's because of their ceramic blade and skin-safe technology, your nicks and snags will be reduced. No personal fouls. Now, guys, look in the mirror and check for any dangling nose or ear hairs. 79% of partners polled admitted that long nose hair is a turnoff. The Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer is your solution. So why not use the best tools for the job out there? You can get both in the performance package to give your package performance. In addition to the Lawnmower 3.0 and the Weed Whacker nose and ear trimmer, performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag for you to use when we're done quarantining, and some other liquid formulations like the Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver. The Crop Preserver is an anti-chafing ball deodorant that ensures that after your workout, you're not left with your boys sticking to your legs or smelling awful, while the Crop Reviver is a spray-on toner for your balls. It's made with soothing aloe and witch hazel extracts that'll give you a nice boost down there. And for a limited time, subscribers get not 1, but 2 free gifts. The Shed Travel Bag, $39 value add, and the patented high-performance anti-chafing Manscaped Boxer Briefs. And you guys, our Rise Up Sea Red listeners, get all that, but you also get 20% off and free shipping with the code CRED at manscaped.com. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code CRED at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code CRED. Whether it's time to turn the team in your pants back into contention, into contenders, or time to take it to the next level, do it with Manscaped. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And in addition to the one move they made at cornerback and a potential move at cornerback, they also both bolstered the safety position. So the first move that they made, which was not unexpected, is the re-signing of Charles Washington, who basically has been his core special teams player for a while. And it was not a surprise, especially because almost the entire core special teams unit was a free agent. So in addition to their punter and their kicker, DJ Foster, Trent Sherfield, Zeke Turner, Dennis Gardeck, Chris Banjo, Kevin Peterson, Charles Washington, all those guys were free agents. And so Washington, who's been one of their gunners the last couple of seasons, it was no surprise to see him get re-signed. And especially, he's on a minimum deal. He gets pretty much what you're seeing a lot of the Cardinals players signing is they're getting a minimal roster exemption for veteran contracts where their cap hit is less than the value of their deal. It basically comes out, they get the league minimum. They can get, I think it's as much as $137,500 in bonuses in addition to the salary. And then their salary cap hit is just under $988,000, so $987,500. So sometimes it's a savings of $140,000 or $225,000 in terms of cap saving. He has no guaranteed contract, no guaranteed salary, and so if he doesn't make the team, it's a minimal dead hit of about $69,000. And if he makes the team, he gets a bonus as well. He gets the rest of the $137,000 for that. But Washington was a good addition. Shores up the special teams unit just to carry on the continuity. The second one was actually the surprise, as we found the other day, that the Cardinals agreed to terms on a one-year deal with Sean Williams, who is experienced in the league. He played 8 seasons with the Cincinnati Bengals. Another guy with ties to Vance Joseph, because it was his second and third season in the league when Vance Joseph was his position coach with the Bengals. This is a guy who basically his first 2 years did nothing but special teams. Started to get some playing time on defense in his third season, and then for the next 4 years was a full-time starter for the Bengals and was fairly solid. And then in 2020, he went back to a strictly special teams role. I'm interested. At first, I'll tell you, my reaction was when I saw the Sean Williams signing, I was like, oh, that's obviously to replace Chris Banjo. And it wasn't necessarily to replace him, but it was to give the Cardinals a little insurance because they banked on Jalen Thompson last year, being healthy and taking a step forward. And what Sean Williams does for me, it gives them a little bit higher ceiling in terms of defensive safety play if JT isn't able to go. And Banjo was fine last year. He didn't play poorly. He was more than serviceable out there. But Williams gets you the potential of being even better in terms of what you get if you can't rely on Jalen Thompson. But what were your thoughts when the news came across? Because it was a surprise to me.
Yeah, I think we kind of texted each other and we were both surprised because we assumed that after Charles Washington came back, the focus would move to Chris Banjo, and then once Banjo did not sign first, we assumed that Sean Williams meant okay, that was the end of the Chris Banjo era, and it's one of those things when you look at it, it's one of those odd things because you're like, well, I don't know if this is an upgrade, I don't know if it's a downgrade, but I definitely liked having Chris Banjo around. So that I think that was the feeling. It wasn't like, oh, this was a mistake or oh, this was a great signing. It was more like, is this going to be the equal that they would need? And then it turns out that, well, no, because they brought back Chris Banjo. So
Absolutely.
So then you're like, okay, why are they having so many safeties? And you brought it up. I mean, they went into the season last year with basically just 3 safeties on the roster. I know Charles Washington was there, but he's not really a guy you want to play in the regular game.
Well, until this last year when he got a few defensive snaps against Carolina because they had no safeties left, he hadn't played on defense since 2017.
Right. So I think the idea this year is obviously Jalen Thompson. Buda's a different guy. Like, this may make sense, it may not. Basically, the only guy that can replace Buda Baker is Isaiah Simmons at this point. And so that's, it doesn't really matter. But having Sean Williams, having Chris Banjo, and then you have Jalen Thompson, you basically have 3 guys that can do similar things. Clearly, Thompson is the most, the best currently of that group and has the most upside of that group. But like Jess said, you can't go in. You obviously couldn't go in with Thompson and Banjo only and have similar results to last year, because then again, that's just a poor job of team management. So instead, you go in and you grab Sean Williams and Chris Banjo. You have them to back up Jalen Thompson if need be. Maybe they can spare Buda Baker, 30 plays or 50 plays on the season, 3 plays a game maybe. But for the most part, I think it's great special teams, core special teams signings, and I think it is excellent depth, veteran depth that they sorely lacked last year.
Absolutely, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out roster wise, because now you're really comfortable with that safety room, and if we're noticing, the trend for the Cardinals this offseason has been very clear, is that they're not like they did last year. Last year, they went into the season banking on the development of certain players. They were banking on it from Kyler Murray. They were banking on Mason Cole stepping up and being solid. They were banking on Jalen Thompson to be solid. And so they were counting on these younger players, and at receiver as well. They were banking on their younger players. Now, granted, they went out and got DeAndre Hopkins, but they also didn't. Like, he was their veteran addition to the room, and so they were still banking on those younger players. What we've seen is that Steve Keim, understanding the window they have with Murray's rookie contract, has decided instead to, if these young players pan out, fantastic, but I'm not counting on it. I'm not going to expect them to come in and play well. So that's why you've seen a Rodney Hudson. Okay, we're upgrading over that. You brought in A.G. Green. You bring in J.J. Watt. Even though Hassan Reddick was great last year, you're like, I'm not going to count on him repeating that, and I'm going to go with some sure veteran knowledge. So saying Gonzalez, is he going to bounce back? No. Let's go out and get Matt Prater, who's done it at that level. And so what I'm actually most intrigued is to see the money for Sean Williams, because he was making $3 million a year up through last season. If he's another minimal deal, okay, then we kind of know what his role is going to be. But if he's up in the $2 to $3 million, then you kind of know what his place is on the roster, how much of it is guaranteed. If they see him as potentially being a guy on the field who might even push Jalen Thompson, instead of saying, hey, we're going to count on JT again, it's like, we're going to hedge. We're going to hedge, and they're doing that at almost everywhere they have some youth, they're hedging, which is interesting to see them do. The one position, I will say this, the one position that they are not hedging is that of Isaiah Simmons. They're saying he needs to be great. And because what they've done, they added Tanner Vallejo, and I don't think you can count on Tanner Vallejo as being the Simmons replacement. And so it's just continuing to do that. I don't think we're going to see all 6 of these safeties they now have on the roster come week 1. It's not going to be, we're not going to see Buddha, JT, Sean Williams, Charles Washington, Chris Banjo, and Deontay Thompson, who actually filled in pretty well when he came in. You could tell that there's some upside there, but he's not quite as instinctive as a Buddha or as a JT. So I think Deontay might be on the bubble this year, and then depending on how the Williams money comes in, that Banjo and Washington will also be fighting for roster spots. That if you're going to go with 5 safeties again, and I think that Deontay Thompson, Chris Banjo, and Charles Washington will be on the bubble there, especially Deontay, because while he played special teams, he hasn't become an irreplaceable special teams player.
No, and I think that's a fair point, because that's the main thing, that safeties, unless you're the guy like Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, that's what safeties have to do well, is play on special teams and contribute that way.
Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, we have another quarterback that's been signed, and the Cardinals once again are adding veteran steadiness, and that's at quarterback. Who'd they add, and what's the situation there? That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The news actually broke. Now, the report came out last week that it was going to be expected, but it is official. He has signed. The Cardinals have signed 12-year veteran Colt McCoy, one of the guys who just, he is having himself a Josh McCown-like career in terms of what he came into the league, not being great as a starter, but managing to stick around for team after team as a backup. So after the Chris Streveler, experience last year as the backup, now the Cardinals, instead of going with the rookie backup like they did last year, they now bring in an experienced vet who's played for the Browns. He's playing for the 49ers, for Washington. And more recently, he backed up Daniel Jones in New York for the Giants. And now you add another veteran, another guy who's very well respected throughout the league as a mentor, an experienced player. And it blew my mind when I looked it up, because to me, Colt McCoy's still like a third-year player. He's in his 12th season. I find that it just goes to show that the Cardinals are not taking any chances with their young players, with the exception of Byron Murphy, perhaps Byron Murphy and Isaiah Simmons. Everyone else, they're going, okay, let's bring in guys who are going to hold people accountable, who we can count on, who are smart, who have experience, and can take us up a notch in their roles.
Yeah, and the McCoy thing is interesting because it's not that I think he's bad. In fact, I think he's kind of the quintessential perfect backup quarterback. I just am intrigued by the fit because we haven't seen the air raid as much as we had expected. I think he'd be a nice fit in that air raid offense. Obviously, maybe not pushing the ball down the field, but the quick releases, the getting the ball out on time, the short throws type of things. Um, but if they're going to continue to be a run heavy team, then they better have more consistent and better running back play. Um, so that would be what I said, because we saw last year how the run game stifled when Kyler Murray couldn't run, and let's be honest, we're not expecting Colt McCoy to be able to run at all if he's taking over for Kyler Murray. So that would be my only concern. Obviously, price. Maybe you and I will complain about it once we know what it is. I think that will have something to do with it as well, because if they spend too much, then it is silly. And you and I have always been open about that. Like, we talked about the Malcolm Butler signing. One of the reasons we did not expect it to happen at all was because he got so little. I mean, you're paying Malcolm Butler the same thing as the Packers are paying Kevin King, and we saw what he did. Um, so yeah, I mean, for the most part, just, I think you have a smart veteran player that gives you real consistency without having to do much else. Uh, on the other side of things, you know, you have to decide what you're looking for and what you're expecting. Unless you're going to draft young quarterbacks year in and year out, I don't think that you I don't think that you can do a whole lot better than Colt McCoy. Like I said, unless you're going to bring in a Kellen Mond or a guy in the draft that fits, that maybe a little better as the pure, true Kyler Murray backup.
So I'm going to pose this question: is this is probably what people think this is a reaction to? Is to, after seeing what happened with Chris Streveler when he had to come in Week 17 for Kyler Murray, do you believe? Now we discussed this after that game. If it had been Brett Hundley who was acting, if Hundley was not acting there for some, like, it was made very clear by Cliff Kingsbury that Streveler beat Hundley out, that he deserved, that he was the guy. He made plays in practice, and so he deserved to be the backup. Some believed that Brett Hundley would have been a difference maker there, and rather than Streveler, probably could have led them to a win. I argued the point that it wouldn't have mattered against that Rams defense, because Hundley's success came with the running game being strong, which the Cardinals didn't have in that game. So, again, the question is, if Colt McCoy is your backup against the Rams, do you believe that the Cardinals could have, or the Cardinals would have, been able to beat John Wolford if he came into the game to replace Murray?
No, and all I have to say is look at next week what they did to Russell Wilson. The Cardinals' offense last year was far too flawed in a number of key positions, most of it being along the offensive line. As you said, they've upgraded that immensely. We talked about that last week with Rodney Hudson. So, all things being equal, if McCoy's the guy last year, no, I don't see them winning. All things being equal, if you say they have the offensive line from this year and McCoy, then I think they have a better shot. I think it's closer to a coin flip. I just don't think anybody offensively was going to be able to do much against that Rams defense with the offensive line, the way the Cardinals had it, and then at that point, unless you are Kyler Murray or Patrick Mahomes or you know um, one of those guys, maybe even a Josh Allen, then where you can create, you're not going to win that game.
So in that case, then it probably wouldn't have mattered. Now, here's the thing with this. So my question now is this: it now becomes, what will the Cardinals do with Strevler? Because Cliff really liked him, and they really liked the potential of what he could do. What do you think they do with him? So you've got different ways to do it. Do they keep him on the roster? Do they then make him that gadget guy? Even though Cliff was very adamant, he's a quarterback. He's a quarterback. Where they keep him on the roster as a third, or they keep him on the practice squad. Or do you think they simply move on just after one season?
It's interesting because I think you can use him in the Taysom Hill role if you're willing to do that. But let's be completely honest. The huge difference there is that you don't have Drew Brees. You have Kyler Murray. So are you wanting to take Kyler Murray off the field? I think in certain situations it could make sense. But I don't know if cutting Chris Trevler for about $800,000 at $780,000 in cap relief. I don't know if Chris Trevler is moving on from Chris Trevler is worth that, unless you truly don't see him as a potential backup to Kyler Murray in the future.
Coming next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to move on to, we're actually going to shift gears now. We're going to begin our talk about the draft. And now that it feels like the Cardinals have kind of done what they're going to do, there might be a couple of moves still coming. What are their priorities and what would be luxuries? If we won't talk necessarily players, but positions. What are their needs, their priorities, and luxuries? That's coming up next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, and we're actually going to take a break from free agency. There might be some more moves as we move forward, but let's talk about the NFL draft. The Cardinals have filled a number of needs. We had square on three positions that were like, what are they doing? Cornerback, which seems to have been taken care of. Running back and tight end. We didn't talk about Darrell Daniels getting re-signed because, it's not like he's a super impact player, but he gives them another tight end on the roster where you're going, okay, that makes sense. So if we're going into this draft next month still, even when you listen to this, unless you listen to this at the very end of the week, in which it is already April, where do you see the Cardinals' priorities or their greatest needs, and therefore the priorities that Steve Keim will have as they enter the draft?
It's interesting because I don't think that they're set at any position except obviously quarterback. And I feel like, and I could be wrong, but I feel like offensive tackle is set because you have DJ Humphries for 2 more years under contract. I mean, they can obviously move on after this year, and you have Kelvin Beachum for 2 more years. So you don't have a pressing 2022 need at offensive tackle. After that, I feel like every position is still up for grabs. Some are just more needs than other. We covered cornerback. Right now, I would put it still near the top of the list. Even with the Malcolm Butler signing, you still need one more, as we discussed earlier in the show, because you can't trust Robert Alford. You just can't go into the season with the idea that he's going to play any significant amount of time. And you wrote about it. He's making veteran minimum. That's what he's making. They're not even counting on him. That's literally what his salary tells you, is they're not counting on him. You look at the outside pass rush linebacker edge position. I love. We've talked about it. I love having Chandler Jones, Devin Kennard, and Marcus Golden. Golden's here on a 1 year, or he's here on a 2 year deal as well.
He is, yes.
Kennard is really your leading cap casualty guy next year. And then Chandler Jones is up after the season, and we've heard no whispers, even whispers about an extension for Jones. Makes sense, as much as Cardinals fans don't want to hear this. 31-year-old coming off a bicep injury. It may not, he may not be worth the 4 year, $60 million deal, that type of deal he may be wanting. It just may not be worth it at this point. So I feel like edge is on the table. Defensive lineman and interior offensive lineman, you really can't have enough. Again, Justin Pugh, prime cut candidate for 2022. Rodney Hudson's 32. Love him. Needs to be extended as well, right? Like, could be done after this season. And then we don't know what's going on at the right guard position. So unless Josh Jones wins that, we have no idea if that's answered. So interior offensive line, and then interior defensive line, J.J. Watt's older. Jordan Phillips was a bust in year one, just from an injury production standpoint. Not saying he can't turn it around, just year one didn't play that well. And then you've got a bunch of guys, Zach Allen, Rashard Lawrence, Lucky Fotu. As we discussed with Byron Murphy, those guys have to start taking that next step if you're going to count on them. Now, that's all defense. You go to the offense, we talked about OTs, quarterbacks. I think those are the only two positions off the table in the early rounds. That leaves running back and tight end. Both of those are really not looked at as first round kind of value picks. But picking 49 may cause some gray area there. And then wide receiver, while I don't think they need an immediate guy, again, AJ Green's 32 on a 1 year deal. Christian Kirk is up after this season. Andy Isabella is a prime cut candidate, probably even this year, if he doesn't show up. So you've got, again, DeAndre Hopkins, and then you're kind of hoping behind him. So that really leaves a lot of things on the table. We didn't even touch on inside linebacker Jordan Hicks. You mentioned that they're not, that Isaiah Simmons along with Murphy are really the guys that they're not, coddling. You still need another inside backer, whether it's depth, whether it's to take over for Jordan Hicks next year, whatever the case may be. So from just the standpoint of pure needs, I would say the biggest needs on the team right now are running back and tight end, just because they haven't really addressed those positions in any significant way up to this point. But again, are those guys you want to take at 16?
Yeah, probably not. And for me, I think priority-wise, so need-wise, their biggest need, I say, is running back and tight end. And then it's still running back, tight end, cornerback, even though the need at cornerback is much less now than it was, especially if they add Dunbar. So, though prioritizing it, I think they have to prioritize the hard part is this, because they've only got the 2 picks in day 1 and day 2. I don't want to say I don't want to consider a day 3 pick a priority, but you do have to add bodies. So running back and tight end, I believe, still are priorities, and cornerback is still kind of a priority in my opinion. Kind of a priority.
And the thing that's going to be interesting is that when you look at that priority list, the one tight end that we would, consider being value at 16 is, seems like a snowball's chance in hell, he'll be
Kyle
there.
Pitts, right?
So, you look at that, you're like, okay. You look at the top corners in the draft, the two big names at this point, J.C. Horn and Patrick Surtain. I don't know if they get past 12 in the Philadelphia Eagles at this point.
It looks really unlikely, and then you've got concerns with Caleb Farley because of the herniated disc issue,
And then you're going into guys that, I like a Greg Newsome quite a bit. I think he's worth the 16th pick. I have no problems if they do it, but that's not a name you've heard associated with the 16th pick in the draft. It may not even be a name you've been associated with in the first round of the draft. So now all of a sudden you're getting into that, okay, well, while corner is probably the top priority, as Jess, astutely pointed out, it may not be the easiest position to fill, especially with the 16th pick.
which I do like how the Cardinals have set things up so they don't have to take any pick at number in the first round. You could go a number of ways. Like you take an offensive lineman and you are basically redshirting that guy, no matter what, unless because between the Justin Murray, the Josh Jones, and the Brian Winters to play at right guard, that rookie, if they're drafting it a guard or even a guy that could be a guard at number 16, he's gonna have to be really good, really fast to play this year. So, if in terms of what you want from a first round pick, it's a lot of people have a hard time drafting someone when the Cardinals do have holes where a rookie could play and make an impact than taking a guy who won't play this year on offense. Cornerback is your best bet. Sneaky, like we start getting to the luxuries. A luxury would be a pass rusher because this year this year in terms of their depth, they're pretty all right. But a year from now, that might be a major priority. So having a guy, say Jalen Phillips, falls in your lap, that might be a sneaky good pick because you can work him in sort of early on. You can find ways to work a pass rusher in. If they get pressure on a quarterback, you're going to find ways to get him on the field. So that would be a sneaky one, although it's not a priority. It'd be a luxury this year that would be a priority a year from now, probably. Then you look at the defensive line. I think it is a luxury based on the roster that they have right now.
And to be quite frank, I don't know if anybody. I'm a Christian Barmore fan, so I don't want this to come out as, slander. I don't know if I'm up to a guy that only played at an incredibly high level in the college football playoffs. Now, when he played in the college football playoffs, he was going against some guys that are going to be playing on Sundays, and he made them look like fools. But I don't know if, on top of the fact that it's not an immediate need, I just don't know if the value is there at 16.
Right. It's just, it makes it very interesting. And running back, I don't have the qualms for taking a first round running back that some other people do. I would love a big time running back in the first round, even though I believe Chase Edmonds can do it and can be effective. And I think the Cardinals are still going to add a veteran to that room. Running back might be, based on what you have talent wise in the first round, might be the biggest priority, even though you might not like it. Now, luxury picks, there's luxury picks all over the place. I think a receiver isn't quite priority, but would be a luxury, but it becomes a priority a year from now. It's just one of those things that you can go a number of directions with. And so, but for me, they need a running back in this draft. They need a tight end in this draft. I think they need a cornerback in this draft. And then everything else would be nice. Everything else would be nice. And so I think in that case, the priorities for me haven't changed. Running back, cornerback, tight end, and everything else is gravy. And so any other thoughts about what, in terms of aside from what we've already gone over, do you see any other direction in terms of priorities and luxuries than what we've already talked about?
Well, so let's play an exercise, and I'm just going to give you some names and tell me at 16 if that luxury is a guy that you would take. So let's say a Jalen Waddle falls to 16. Are you comfortable taking him? Because he probably is at that point the best player on the board, but are you going to take a wide receiver that, as you said, is probably not going to get a ton of snaps in season one?
Maybe not, but yes, I would be comfortable with Jalen Waddle. Yes.
Okay, and then what about a Micah Parsons? So Micah Parsons, the top inside linebacker prospect, maybe some red flags off the field, but the absolute, on the field shades of Patrick Willis type of impact level.
Oh, that's I love the potential. Like, if we ignore the potential issues, I love it. But no, I don't draft him this year.
And so that's where it gets interesting because I think once you get to 16, unless a Horn or a Sertan fall, those are really the only two slam dunk guys, right? Like after that, un, like I said, unless maybe a Jalen Waddle or a Devonte Smith fall to you at
I
16.
mean, Kyle Pitts, sure, but he's going top five.
Right. So I mean, so unless you say a Pitts, Waddle, or Smith are there at 16, a slam dunk guy that just falls out of the top 10 like they do every season, CD Lamb last year. Who are you taking? And that's where it becomes interesting because then all of a sudden you go, okay, so there's no JC Horn, there's no Patrick Surtain. And then the receivers and Pitts are gone. So now you're into the tier two wide receivers, Rashad Bateman, Kadarius Toney, Terrace Marshall, those guys, or you're into the top edge prospect. But as you said, they're probably going to be a 30 to 40% type snap guy in year one, just really as a pass rush specialist in year one, or you go to a non-premium position. You're looking all of a sudden at a guy like Travis Etienne or Najee Harris. I think the way the Cardinals have set it up, it makes it easier. It's an easier pill to swallow if you take a Najee Harris at 16 than if you didn't have a Malcolm Butler, and you didn't have a Rodney Hudson that you've added. All of a sudden, you're like, I feel like they really need to, maybe they take a Landon Dickerson or a Elijah Vera Tucker at 16, or they take a Greg Newsome or I don't even know who the Asante Samuel Jr. and you really reach for a guy. But I think they put themselves in a position where they don't have to do that. And that's at the end of the day, as much guff as we give Steve Keim on the show, that's all you can really ask for, right? Is options at 16 and not having to address a pressing need at 16.
Yeah, the strategy is good. The strategy is sound. It just isn't working out when it comes to draft time. So here's a name as well. What if Rashawn Slater is available or Christian Darrisaw?
Darisaw, I'm guy that we're gonna have on Solely Football. I think he's at Solely Chiefs on Twitter. Played college offensive line. He's a guy I really trust when it just comes to offensive line evaluations. You He's from Virginia. He's been a huge Christian Darrisaw fan. Um, he obviously a Chiefs fan, and they said, "Well, if Darrisaw fell to 31, would you take him?" And he said he'd be hesitant because of the concerns about his effort level. I think we've talked a little bit about his weight. That's a concern. I think he's listed at like what 330, 325 right now. Um, and there's just concerns about consistency within it. And I think that would make Darisaw tough. Slater, I would think, would be a slam dunk. He's a guy that can play left tackle if you want to move on from DJ Humphries in a year. He can play right tackle if you want to move on from Kelvin Beachum. And I think he can play inside. So he gives you kind of that flexibility. And he's a guy that is an incredibly hard worker and disciplined type of guy. So I think, again, you have to look at it. Darisaw could be a lot like DJ Humphries. Now that's worked out in year 4 and 5 and 6 for the Cardinals, but are you is this regime going to be around in 4 years to find out if he's any good at that point? So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to discuss, because the other player that we haven't discussed yet that I really like, and that I would be disappointed in taking him, but I would be completely fine with that, would be Zaven Collins, the Tulsa linebacker that's 6'4", 260, but plays off-ball linebacker. I mean, he's just a freak of nature. And so, again, you look at early 2010 San Francisco 49ers, you could be looking at a similar impactful young inside linebacker duo in Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins, from an um, athletic and ability standpoint. That's just, I mean, that would be, again, a luxury, but could it just be a case of they took the best player on their board?
It might be. It might be. And we'll talk more about the draft specifically coming up in the next few weeks. But coming up next on the Rise of C Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk. Let's wrap this up by talking about the big surprising trades that happened with the early picks in the draft. What are our thoughts on what's going to happen? Seth and Justin on their podcast talked a little bit about it in their episode this week. But likewise, will it affect the Cardinals at pick number 16? That's coming next on Rise of C Red. We're back on the Rise of C Red, the podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Suddenly there was all sorts of moves going on in the NFL draft, because last week the San Francisco 49ers, who had the 12th pick, decide to go all the way up to number 3. They give up in all 3 first-round picks and a third, so they're giving up. They give up the number 12 pick this year. They give up a first and a third next year, and they give up a first the next year after that to go up to number 3, which signals, hey, they're going to draft a quarterback. Surprise, surprise. They didn't sign anyone to replace Jimmy Garoppolo, and they might not even get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo. But Miami trades down to 12, picks up a bunch of draft capital, but then like 5 minutes later, then they move back up, trading up to number 6 with the Philadelphia Eagles. And so now the draft order goes, Jacksonville, Jets, 49ers, and instead of the Dolphins there, now the Dolphins now pick at number 6, and the Eagles pick at number 12. I'm not surprised that the 49ers went up, because it has become very clear that they are looking to upgrade at quarterback. But while let's say they like Jimmy Garoppolo, they don't know if they can count on him moving forward, because if there's one thing that he has, he's not durable. He got injured in his first stint with the Patriots when he got the chance to start in 2016. He got hurt then. Then he looked great with the 49ers when he first was traded over there, and then tore his ACL. Then the 2018 season was special. Then 2019 season was special, that is. So 13-3. He was fantastic. Takes them to the Super Bowl. But then 2020, and again with the injuries. So while most of us would say that Jimmy Garoppolo is still not a top-tier quarterback, he is a guy you can win with. And is a guy you can win a championship with, probably with the right roster around him. But they're going to get a quarterback, whoever that is. That's a discussion for another show. It's actually a discussion for you to listen to Seth's show with Justin on the original Draft Breakdown podcast, as they talk about that at length. But how surprised were you that the Dolphins then moved back up?
Yeah, that was the bigger shock to me, because as we talked about a little bit in the open, they don't control anything at pick 6. So they must feel like they know for certain 3 quarterbacks are going top 3. And then from there, they're comfortable, whatever the scenario is, whether it's Kyle Pitts, Jamar Chase, or Devontae Smith, maybe even Jalen Waddle, they're comfortable with the guarantee that one of those 3 guys is there, because now all of a sudden one of those 3 guys will definitely be there. Maybe they even have a guy like Penei Sewell right there. And so you go from saying like, oh, I'm not sure who to take at 3. Do you want to take Pitts? Do you want to take Sewell? Do you want to take Chase? Do you want to take Smith? To now you trade down to 6, and likely the decision's going to be made for you, right? Because now you don't have to make that decision. You got an extra first round pick out of it, and then you say, hey, we had all these 3 guys graded the same. We don't have to make that pick now. And so I think that's the only real logic I can make out of it, is that it was just interesting to me that they came back up, because they must have had a guy in mind at 3, or been comfortable with the set of guys at 3, now knowing for a fact they'll get them at 6. Again, assuming that 3 quarterbacks go off the board. Because if the Jets or the 49ers, for that matter, do something crazy and take a Kyle Pitts, now, again, the Dolphins don't know. Like, that might start a run on something. But if they feel really confident that, it's going to go Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and somebody, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, or Mac Jones, then they don't really care. And that 6th pick basically becomes the 3rd non-quarterback in the draft, and they can really have their choice. The bigger question would be, now, what does that mean for Atlanta and Cincinnati in terms of trade down capital? Because now, if Miami does look at it and say, hey, these are one of our 3 guys, or maybe they only have 2 guys, maybe it's only Pitts or Chase, and I'm just spitballing, we don't know. But now all of a sudden teams like Atlanta and Cincinnati, well, you have to get in front of them for one of those guys. And so it's a risk, unless you really truly have 3 equal grades on 3 equal prospects. It's a risk to me, because you don't control the situation. I get that it's you control it more than you do when you're at 12, but you just got all this draft capital, and then you used one of those first round picks to move back up just 6 spots. It seemed like they have a plan. I just am going to be interested to see if they can execute it.
Right. In terms of how it affects the Cardinals, I'll say this. I don't think it does a dang thing with the Cardinals, because essentially this was all movement within the top 12 picks. So had no one moved anywhere, essentially probably the same players would have been left on the board. In terms of how this affects the Cardinals, I don't think it does a dang thing either way for what their plans are with the 16th pick. However, this does affect the Cardinals moving forward, because now they are the only team with the first round pick next year. And so in the 49ers, the one thing by making this move, they trade up to number 3. They're getting a quarterback, which means Jimmy Garoppolo will be maybe here this year, but he definitely won't be with the team next year. For the next 2 seasons, on a rookie contract, they won't have a first-round pick to add talent. Now, you'll be able to have the financial flexibility to go out in free agency and add it, but it comes at a cost, and that helps the Cardinals long term over the next couple of seasons, because it means San Francisco is unable to add premier talent at the in their drafts the next 2 seasons. And we already know that the Rams have basically forfeited the entire the first round of the draft. I don't think they believe in first round picks anymore. And Seattle as well is sitting without a pick next year as well in the first round. So the Cardinals, it's not something that affects them in 2020 so much, but it does put them in a nice position in the division next year. Although if all goes well, it's not that big a deal, because they'll be picking 32, right?
Well, and that's the thing though, is even if you're picking, let's say even slightly more realistic, and let's say that they make a good run and they end up going to an NFC championship game, or maybe even, bailing out in the NFC divisional round, so they get close, but they improve, they get close. You're still at a spot where now you can make that a similar move. Basically, what all these teams in the NFC West are doing are going for broke. Um, and so, San Francisco is basically resetting themselves, as you said, knowing that for the next 3 years that they have to find a way to win, because from there, we've already seen it. They chose Eric Armstead over DeForest Buckner. Obviously, like my Jordan Phillips comment earlier, it's a year one of that decision, but it's definitely not the right decision. I mean, you and I would agree with that, right?
Yes.
And it may have been that they waited a year too long to make the decision on Jimmy G, but as you pointed out so astutely earlier, it's not like you could have moved on from him when he just was 8 minutes away from winning you a Super Bowl.
Right? That wouldn't have
So
made any sense at all.
so now now they're going for broke. So you've got the Rams who are going for broke. You've got the Seahawks who, much to Russell Wilson's chagrin, continue to go for broke. And then you've got the 49ers who, after this draft, are going for broke. So you're not at that spot yet. Well, we've talked about them loading up for this 2-year run at for Kyler's rookie contract. You're only in year one of that 2-year run, so you've really got a 2-year plan to enact, with the ability to, if you're close, like we said, like say you're say you bow out in the NFC divisional, or God forbid, the NFC championship round. Both of those things would be immense improvements. And you say, hey, we've got to get one other skilled veteran playmaker uh, to put next to DeAndre Hopkins. Well, now all of a sudden you're saying, well, we're competing. We're in that deep area. We can let go of the 29th pick in the draft for and I'm going to throw a name out there. I don't even know if he's available, an Allen Robinson type of player, right? Like now all of a sudden we're willing to trade that, because we know that we're in that last little section of that Kyler Murray rookie contract. So that's how it affects the Cardinals right now, is that the closer they get, the more that they'll have to probably go the same way, because like you said, once you get to that quarterback contract, you have to start really finagling in different ways uh, to ensure that you um, to make sure that you are continuing to compete. And usually the best way to do that is to trade draft capital for proven talent. Uh, and let's be fair too, that's what Steve Keim's done best in his career thus far.
It is true. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And our next shows will be all about the draft, unless the Cardinals do something in free agency. But if we're looking at the schedule, guys, I'm thinking what we will do is take next week off. That will give us on the 6th, because that'll give us the chance to go with, in 2 weeks, we'll go with the offensive prospects on the 13th, the defensive prospects on the 20th, and then do our first round mock draft the week of the draft once we're there just a couple of days away. So we will take the next week off. We'll be back in 2 weeks. And that's that, guys. Thanks for listening. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again in 2 weeks.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.